the haunted mirror. Claire had always been fascinated by antiques, the allure of old objects with mysterious histories drawing her in like a moth to a flame. So when she found the mirror at a local market, she knew she had to have it. The mirror was beautiful, its ornate frame carved with intricate swirling patterns that seemed almost alive, shifting and changing when she glanced away. The glass was polished to perfection, reflecting the world with an almost unnatural clarity. It was a piece that spoke of forgotten times and untold secrets, and Claire was captivated. The old man who sold it to her was eager to get rid of it. His hands trembled as he wrapped it carefully in a cloth, his eyes avoiding hers as he muttered something about the mirror being old and temperamental. Claire didn't pay much attention to his words. She was too entranced by her new find. She carried the mirror home with a sense of excitement, eager to find the perfect spot for it in her bedroom. Once home, she hung the mirror on the wall opposite her bed, admiring how it caught the light and made her room feel larger, more mysterious. She stood in front of it, admiring her reflection, pleased with how the mirror seemed to enhance her features. But as she turned to leave, she thought she saw something move in the background. Just a flicker, like a shadow passing quickly out of view. She shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination, and went on with her day. That night, as Claire got ready for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mirror seemed to draw her attention, pulling her gaze towards it even when she tried to look away. She caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Dark shapes lurking in the corners of the room. Faces that weren't her own staring back at her, their expressions twisted and unnatural. She tried to dismiss it as fatigue, but the unease lingered, making it difficult to fall asleep. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences only grew worse. The mirror's reflections became more distorted, more unsettling. Claire began to see her deepest fears play out in the glass. Visions of being lost in a dark, endless void, of faceless figures reaching out to drag her down into the shadows. The mirror seemed to taunt her, showing her things she never wanted to see, things that left her feeling cold and hollow. Then came the night when everything changed. Claire was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of being watched, when she noticed something strange. Her reflection wasn't moving in sync with her. She raised her hand to touch her face, but the reflection did not mimic the action. Instead, it stood there, still as a statue, staring back at her with a smile that sent chills down her spine. The smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. It was a smile that didn't belong on her face. And then the reflection began to move on its own, slowly, deliberately, raising its hand to press against the glass. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as the room grew cold, the temperature dropping so rapidly that her breath misted in the air. The mirror started to glow with an eerie, sickly light, casting long, unnatural shadows across the room. A whisper filled the air, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from the mirror, from the twisted reflection that now seemed more real than she did. The voice was cold and malevolent, telling her that it wanted her soul, that it had been waiting for someone like her, someone who could be trapped, someone who could take its place. Claire tried to tear her gaze away, but she couldn't. The mirror held her, its pull irresistible. She felt herself being drawn closer, her body moving against her will. The reflection's hand pushed against the glass, and to her horror, it began to break through, the surface of the mirror rippling like water. The hand reached out, its fingers cold and solid as they wrapped around her wrist, pulling her towards the glass. She struggled, but the force was too strong. With a final, desperate scream, Claire was yanked into the mirror, her body passing through the glass as if it were a doorway. On the other side, she found herself in a twisted, nightmarish version of her bedroom. The walls were dark and warped, the air thick with a suffocating sense of dread. Everything was wrong, distorted, as if she were seeing the world through a funhouse mirror. And there, standing on the other side of the glass, was her reflection. Only it wasn't her anymore. It was the ghost, the malevolent spirit that had been trapped in the mirror for centuries, now free to walk in the real world, wearing her face. It turned and smiled at her one last time, a grin full of malice and triumph, before it stepped out of the room, leaving Claire trapped inside the mirror, pounding on the glass with no one to hear her screams. The next morning, Claire's family noticed a change in her. She was quieter, her movements a little too precise, her smile a little too wide. They dismissed it as fatigue or stress, never suspecting that the girl they saw was not their daughter, but a spirit that had taken her place. The haunted mirror remained in her room, its glass now dark and lifeless, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to look into its depths and fall victim to the curse within. The Candleman. In the mist-shrouded village of Gloomwick, where the fog clung to the earth like a heavy blanket, and the night seemed to stretch on forever, there was a story that everyone knew, but no one dared to speak of aloud. It was the tale of the Candleman, a mysterious figure who appeared only on the darkest of nights, carrying a single flickering candle. The elders whispered that those who crossed paths with the Candleman were never seen again, their souls trapped forever in the wax of his ever-burning candle. Thomas was a boy with a restless spirit and a thirst for adventure, the kind that often led him into trouble. He had heard the tale of the Candleman many times, told in the hushed tones of frightened villagers around the hearth. But unlike the others, Thomas did not fear the story. He was intrigued by it. He longed to see if the legend was true, to know if the Candleman was real, or just another ghost story meant to keep children in their beds. One night, when the fog was so thick that even the moon could not pierce through it, Thomas decided to test his courage. He waited until the village was asleep, the lights in the windows extinguished, and then he slipped out of his home, a small lantern clutched in his hand. The streets were deserted, the air heavy with an unnatural silence. The only sound was the soft crunch of Thomas's footsteps on the damp cobblestones. As he wandered through the empty streets, Thomas began to feel a chill creeping up his spine. The fog seemed to grow thicker with each step, swirling around him like a living thing, obscuring the path ahead. The houses of the village loomed out of the mist like ghosts, their outlines blurred and shifting. Thomas's heart began to race, but he pushed the fear aside, telling himself that it was just the fog playing tricks on his mind. But then, he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. The flicker of a flame. Thomas froze, his breath catching in his throat. He strained his ears, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the fog muffled everything. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A faint, flickering light just ahead of him, barely visible through the swirling mist. Curiosity and fear warred within him, but Thomas couldn't resist the pull of the light. He began to walk toward it, his feet moving almost of their own accord. The closer he got, the more he could make out the figure holding the candle. The light revealed a tall, shadowy silhouette, its face hidden in darkness, the candle burning brightly in its outstretched hand. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the figure. The air around him grew colder, the fog so thick now that he could barely see his own hands. The candle's flame flickered and danced, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. Thomas wanted to turn back, to run as fast as he could, but his body betrayed him, his legs carrying him closer to the Candleman. The figure remained still, silent as the grave, its face a void of darkness. As Thomas drew near, the Candleman extended the candle toward him, the flame reflecting in Thomas's wide, terrified eyes. The light was mesmerizing, pulling him in, making his thoughts sluggish and his body heavy. Suddenly, the flame flared brighter, and Thomas felt a searing cold rush through his veins, freezing him in place. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as if the very life was being drained from him. His vision blurred, the world around him fading into darkness as his soul was drawn into the candle's flame. The last thing Thomas saw before the darkness claimed him was the Candleman's face, or rather, the absence of one. Beneath the hood, there was nothing but shadow, a deep, endless void that seemed to swallow all light. The Candleman turned, the candle now burning brighter than before, and disappeared into the fog, leaving behind nothing but the echo of Thomas's final breath. The next morning, the village awoke to a thick, oppressive fog that seemed heavier than usual. As the villagers went about their day, they noticed something strange at the church altar. A new candle, small and unassuming, burning with a steady, unwavering flame. The wax dripped slowly, each drop glistening like a tear. But no one questioned where the candle had come from, or why it never seemed to go out. The villagers spoke in hushed whispers of Thomas's disappearance, but no one dared to suggest what they all secretly feared. And so, the story of the Candleman continued, a cautionary tale passed down through the generations. The villagers would often glance at the candle on the altar, its flame flickering ever so slightly, and shudder at the thought of the souls trapped within the wax, their voices forever silenced. But at night, when the fog rolled in, and the village was shrouded in darkness, some claimed they could hear the faint flicker of a flame, and see a shadowy figure moving through the mist, carrying a candle that burned with the light of lost souls. And in those moments, the villagers would lock their doors and draw their curtains tight, praying that the Candleman would pass them by, and that they would not become the next to vanish into the night. The Shadow Surgeon. In a state-of-the-art hospital, there is a section of the basement that has been sealed off for years. The hospital staff avoid talking about it, but the rumor among the nurses is that the basement was once used as an illegal surgical clinic, where a rogue doctor known as the Shadow Surgeon performed experiments on patients in the dead of night. Dr. Mia Price, a new surgeon at the hospital, is assigned to the night shift. She's heard the stories about the Shadow Surgeon, but she doesn't believe in ghosts. One night, after a particularly grueling surgery, Mia decides to explore the hospital's basement, curious about the old tales. As she descends into the basement, the lights flicker and the air grows cold. The corridors are lined with rusted medical equipment, and the smell of antiseptic and old blood fills the air. Mia finds a set of old surgical tools, still stained with dried blood, and a series of patient records that date back decades. The records detail horrifying experiments, procedures that no sane doctor would ever attempt. As Mia explores deeper into the basement, she begins to hear the faint sound of surgical instruments clinking and muffled screams echoing through the walls. The shadows around her seem to move, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. She finds a door at the end of the hall, marked with a red cross, and against her better judgment, she opens it. Inside, she finds a fully equipped operating room, eerily pristine despite the years of abandonment. The walls are lined with jars containing preserved organs, and the operating table is set up as if ready for surgery. The air is thick with the scent of formaldehyde, and Mia hears a voice, a low, gravelly whisper, telling her that the shadow surgeon never left. The lights in the room flicker and die, plunging Mia into darkness. She feels cold hands on her shoulders, pushing her towards the operating table. The voice grows louder, more insistent, as the instruments on the table begin to move on their own. Mia is paralyzed with fear as the shadow of the surgeon looms over her, scalpel in hand. The next morning, the hospital staff find the basement sealed once again, the door locked from the inside. Dr. Mia Price is reported missing, but no trace of her is ever found. However, the night shift nurses start to hear whispers and see fleeting shadows in the operating rooms. The legend of the shadow surgeon grows, and the basement remains a place of terror, where the line between the living and the dead is blurred by the sharp edge of a scalpel.